Rev'd by day.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to Rev'd Up by Death. Today is our second episode, and we are going to have an overview on certain topics that we will dive into more detail later on. Gavin, welcome to our second episode of Rev'd Up by Death.
Thank you so much, Gabby. I'm sure you can hear the thunder in the background, and we're taking that as divine approval for our podcast. Gabby, this episode's quite important because we are looking at helping people to prepare for death. Now, that sounds quite macabre. I mean, who prepares for death?
Exactly, and are people ever fully prepared?
I don't think so. Even when you find someone who's terminally ill and folks say, we know this is coming, you cannot anticipate how overwhelming it is to lose someone. And that is why it's so important that folk get as much in place beforehand so that they can focus on their grief and processing their loss without having to be distracted by all the practical arrangements that need to take place.
And I often say to families, it's one thing arranging a funeral. You've actually got the help from a funeral director. But the big problem lies when you're winding up an estate, when you're closing bank accounts, things like that. And I think in this episode, we can just briefly discuss on those certain topics. Yeah.
Absolutely, because it all comes down to decision making. Mm-hmm. And you'll find that most folk ask the question, what would my loved one have wanted?
Exactly.
For the funeral, for the death arrangements, what financial provisions have been made. And if those decisions are taken in advance, then the families don't have to deal with that stress over and above their grief itself.
And that's the whole thing about having an eternal records file. I know my gran was very prepared. What she did was she had everything labeled, every file, personal, bank accounts, every house she owned, so that when something did happen or should happen to her, we knew exactly where to go and pull the file, all her personal things were in there. And I think it's vitally important that, especially the viewers and people that are going through sort of a family member who is terminally ill, is to get all your ducks in a row.
Absolutely, because it's quite a selfish thing not to do that.
100%. And what happens, Gav? I mean, think about it. If you haven't got a will in place, what happens to somebody's assets?
Exactly. And those will be the kind of questions that we'll be looking at in our next episode, where we invite a lawyer in. We'll be talking about wills and estates and things like that.
And what to do and what not to do.
Exactly right.
And maybe even discuss with us about family feuds.
Exactly.
When one family reckons that the will should have been this and the other part of the family says, no, the will should have been like that.
And if that's dealt with in advance, it solves so many difficulties and conflicts and problems when death comes, which is often unexpected.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the topic that number one is leaving a legacy. And, underneath that, it's wills. Who's your executor? Sort of, are you going to make donations to a church or an SPCA or a charity of some sort? What's going to happen to your pets? I mean, my dad he's an animal lover. So I think, number one,
That's why he loves his children.
Yeah, well, yeah, you can call me an animal. So, for example, he's got an African grey. African greys are supposed to be listed in your will. I mean, they can outlive any human. So I think that's important. Financial advisor, medical aid, whether it's bank accounts, your investments. So I think later on in the series of podcasts, we'll dive into more of the financial aspect of having a will, who to notify, what to close, what not to close, debit orders and things like that.
Exactly. And it's essential to make sure that there's a legal document that's been drawn up and that the family knows where the will is.
Yes.
And who the executors are going to be, which attorneys they've dealt with, simply so that when their loved one dies, they can go to that document. And as you say, really helpful to put it in a file and put everything together.
And then also finances. Death is such a grudge purchase. We know it's the inevitable. But the thing is when the families are whacked with a bill, they're quite surprised. But they've had so long to plan for this. So, at Tom Kite, we offer two scenarios. A prepaid funeral which is basically taking the financial burden off your family and paying today's rates. So if anything should happen, the contract's in place, and they're only liable for either the doctor's fees and the crematorium fees. Also, with a policy, which we'll be launching soon, is inform your next of kin or the family on where the policy is, what your premium is, what do you get for that premium, and then everything should be fine in the sense that the financial burden is completely off the family and they don't have to be responsible for a huge amount of money, and so unexpected.
Of course, once again, you lose a loved one, you're overwhelmed by that loss. Now you don't have the financial resources to give them a dignified burial. And of course, I would imagine that would include life insurance policies.
Yes.
That sometimes have funeral cover as well. Sometimes there's specific funeral policies too that folk have. So if someone has a funeral policy through a particular funeral home, can they still come to Tom Kite?
So when it's with another funeral home, no. They're almost contracted to using that unless they do a cash back. So for example, with Tom Kite Funeral Plans, our policies will be cash back. So whether you're in Cape Town, Mafeking, Eastern Cape, wherever, you can be paying our premium and the beneficiary is paid the amount. So whether they are in Mafeking, Eastern Cape, they can just appoint their undertakers.
Okay, so the cashback will give them greater flexibility.
Yes.
In a way.
And that's why the banks, Capitec, Standard Bank, ABSA, FNB, they all do policies where they just pay the beneficiary and they can choose which undertakers will take care of the arrangements.
So part of preparing for death is to make sure that the financial arrangements have been covered.
Exactly.
And you can do that through policies, you can do that through prepaid funeral, or you can set money aside and just make sure the family know how to access it in order to cover those costs.
Agreed. And just I want to touch more on the prepaids, Gav, is that some people think, oh, how morbid. I think it's the best way, because how it works is I would come to your house, I would say to you, Gav, I believe you want to take out a prepaid funeral. What is it that you want? Do you want a burial? Do you want a cremation? What coffin do you want? What flowers do you want? What venue? Which minister? What hymns? Who do you want to say a eulogy? Pallbearers? So everything is all jotted down on a piece of paper that we keep in our archives, and then when something should happen to you, the family know exactly what you want, and the family's living up to your wishes. I find that vitally important. I told you in the first episode that sometimes families can have an argument. The one agrees on a burial, the one agrees on a cremation. If it's down on paper, whether it's with the undertakers or at home in a file, nobody can argue. Nobody.
Absolutely right. When preparing for memorial or funeral services, it's like dealing with a deer in the headlights, because they're faced with all these decisions that have to be made. So as you've mentioned already, do they want a funeral service where the coffin's present, a memorial service where there's no coffin present? If there's a coffin present, do they want to do a viewing of the deceased beforehand? Do they want a picture of the deceased up front? What kind of music do they like? Scripture readings? Do they even want a service? And so often families feel that they're put on the spot and they have to make those decisions. And if the deceased person has already left written instructions as to what they would prefer, just takes the pressure off them. Even if those instructions go as far as saying you make the decisions.
Yes.
And then the family members know that.
Yeah, rest at ease.
Exactly. Without feeling this pressure of, I put in inverted commas, of letting their loved one down. So some of the things to talk about with your loved ones when it comes to your service would include very practical things. Do you want catering afterwards? Do you want to go for a wake at the local pub?
Yeah, cheers with a pint of beer.
Exactly, that's right. Which minister do you want to take the service? I had a former colleague in my congregation many, many years ago who left a very clear instruction in his will that he didn't want me to take the service. So it also works that way as well. Also, where do you want the service? We have memorial services in all sorts of places, in gardens, in churches perhaps that you attended. Some folk just like to have an informal gathering in their home.
get together in the garden,
Exactly. And
meet at the local pub where they met on a Friday, have a
That's
beer
right.
together, and I actually call it a celebration of life.
Indeed.
And I think when people talk about funerals and memorial services, people get confused. I don't know if you've obviously picked that up.
Absolutely.
So obviously a funeral being where the deceased is present in a coffin in the church, where a memorial is a celebration of life. There's no coffin, sometimes no ashes either. So I think people do get confused, and we'll touch on that a bit later.
Absolutely. That'll be another episode that we'll look at those options, which folk prefer, indeed.
And as well as a burial and a cremation, 9 times out of 10, I will speak to a family in the morning and they'll say, no, my mom's wishes were to be buried. And then you go further on in the arrangements and then they say, no, not burial anymore, cremation. Because people just think that it's actually the same thing. I know people that obviously attend church and things like that might have a full understanding of what the difference between a burial is and what a cremation is. But people are so almost oblivious because they don't know.
And that's again why decisions need to be made beforehand so the family don't have the pressure of dealing with that. And of course, if it's a burial, where do you want to be buried? Family plot, if there is one. If there isn't a family plot, where would you like to go? There's a number of options. You want to go to West Park, you better hurry up because that's getting full. And so those are the kind of things that need to be spoken about. If you don't feel comfortable talking to your family and loved ones about these things, you can leave written instructions. And my suggestion would be leave a note with your will and just say these are the requirements that we have for the burial service.
Yes.
But something else that's quite important, Gabs, is not only for when you die, but also when someone is ill or terminally ill. Folk fall ill so quickly. We had a congregation member who got ill middle of January, went to hospital for the first time 3 weeks later. We were doing a funeral.
Oh.
And there was just no preparation, and her husband had to try and figure out what he thinks she would have liked in terms of treatment and things like that. So it's vitally important to chat to your family members or to leave written instructions in terms of potential treatment. So if it's cancer, for example, do I want chemotherapy or radiation? Some people want to fight for every last breath. Others prefer quality of life. It's important to have legal documents in place, such as a living will. So if you don't want to be kept alive on machines and things like that, imperative that you have a living will that is signed and witnessed. And then there's also something else called a do not resuscitate, a DNR form.
I actually want that tattooed on my chest.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, I don't want that.
So they know exactly.
No, please. You open my shirts, you already see the DNR. And I think my dad's also, he's on that page with me. I've actually met a lady who remembers everything from being resuscitated.
Sure.
And she's now, she has a living will and she stipulated strictly, do not resuscitate me.
Wow. Because it was so traumatic.
Yeah. She says just the lights, just that compression on her chest. She says it's actually traumatized her.
I can imagine.
So I do agree with you. A living will is vitally important.
Imperative. And you can download living wills, templates of the internet. You do find official forms at stationers. And I really encourage people to deal with that now while they're healthy and can make those decisions.
Agreed.
Because when you're lying in ICU and a doctor comes up to your family and says, do we put them on life support or not? That's not the time to have to make that decision.
No,
You want
it's almost too late.
Exactly. So over and above that, there are also other components to it. If you want to be an organ donor, for example, have that conversation with your family and register online. That's what you do nowadays. And also if you want to donate your body to medical science, that's something I believe that Tom Kite facilitate.
Yeah, so we actually contracted to Wits Medical School. So if a family member has stipulated ages ago or even recent that their wishes are for their body to be donated to Wits Medical School, we do the removal, we do the registration. So that's obtaining obviously the notice of death and the abridged South African death certificate. We phone Wits Medical School. They bring their rep out and he obviously examines the body because there's certain criteria. And I think people don't know this. Maybe they get sent the contract, they fill out everything, but you can't be obese, you can't have bed sores, and you cannot die of an unnatural death. So I think people don't know this. And also, what I often say to people, in the green ID books, you used to get those little red stickers that would say organ donor.
Yes.
So also people think, I'm an organ donor, okay, I pass away at home, they're going to remove my organs. You've already passed. Only if you pass away in a hospital can they obviously keep you on the life support and then extract the organs. So what I do is, if I do see that little red sticker in a green ID book, or I don't know if it's on the ID card now, is I actually say to the family, would you like to live up to the loved one's wishes of being an organ donor? And they say yes or no. I get in touch with the tissue bank. They're in Pretoria. I phone Pandile. I say, Pandile, we've got an organ donor here, but they passed away at home. They come and examine the body, and they actually extract the tissue as well as the bones. Obviously, families all consented, forms are sent, the tissue bank's also in contact. So that's another option. And you're saving so many lives as well.
And in a sense, your death is not wasted.
No.
Because other people benefit from that experience. But we're going to do a whole episode on that, and we'll perhaps get someone in to...
We'll get Sindile from the tissue bank to come in. Yes. And also with the emotional preparation, you have, this as a minister, letters, videos. The family can start compiling sort of old memories, old pictures from when sort of a terminally ill person was born, middle-aged, teenager, adults, you know what I mean? And they can compile everything and put it in a folder so that when the time does come, they can make a beautiful slideshow.
Absolutely. And, I guess there are two components to this. You have your terminal patient who knows that their time is limited. And in a way, that's a gift from the point of view that, and of course, it's not a gift that someone's dying, but in the point of view is that you have time to connect with family and loved ones, and to be intentional, and to spend time with them, to say the things that you need to say, and perhaps to leave letters or videos and things like that. But I think even if you're not terminally ill, what a wonderful thing to leave in that folder with the will and the instructions for the funeral and all the rest, letters to your loved ones, or to take personalized videos for your children. Say I love you, preferably nice videos and nice comments, and say I love you and thank you for this, and that was meaningful to me. People have gone as far as leaving messages behind for their memorial service, and we've played on our TVs messages from the loved ones to the mourners that have gathered. And it's a very thoughtful thing to do. It's a very kind and loving thing to do. And it just makes the final word on your farewell so personal and so meaningful. So we really encourage folk when they think about their preparations for their death to consider doing something creative like that, and to leave a legacy that lasts beyond the grave.
Agreed. Tell me, have you ever heard of sort of like a while you were alive memorial service?
I have. I've never been involved in one, but it's something that I communicate with my congregation quite regularly. Rather say that you love the person now.
Yeah.
Rather deal with the issues now. And I guess in a way our birthdays are that kind of celebration, a celebration of life. We have a 104-year-old who will be celebrating his 104th birthday in April. And I met with his children recently and just encouraged them to celebrate his life now while he's still around, while he's still alive.
I think that's quite an impressive innings. I think might be better than the Proteas sometimes.
I think it's something we put in our communion wine at St. James.
Maybe I should come and have some of your wine. And then also, Gav, just in the full preparation, I don't know how more we can elaborate to people on how vitally important all these topics are. Yourself and myself, working in these industries, I often sit down and almost have such a debacle with myself to say, again, there's two certainties in life, death and taxes. Sort it out now. Get everything prepared now so that there isn't a problem.
Absolutely. And, it literally takes 15 minutes to have a conversation with your family. Let's say half an hour to write a page of instructions, to print it out, type it out, whatever it is, and to leave it for your family. And that short amount of time can save huge heartache. I've had families in my office shouting at each other because they have different opinions on what the loved one would have wanted.
Yes.
from simple things as to whether they wanted to sing something at the funeral, all the way through as to, as you mentioned earlier, who gets the dog.
Yeah.
And to save people or loved ones, friends, that kind of anguish is a huge gift to them in the face of their death.
Yeah, Gav, the more I say to families, if I'm helping a wife that's lost her husband, I always say to her, ma'am, please give yourself 3 months. I know it's very raw, but please go and update your will. Update your beneficiaries. Because what happens when the husband's passed, the wife's still around, and then they haven't changed their beneficiaries on their wills or their policies?
Exactly. We've had a number of folk who have passed away, and their estate is barely wound up when the spouse has passed away, and it just leaves such a mess. We need to make sure everything's tied up. Yes.
But I'm quite excited for Robin to come. Robin will be the lawyer.
Attorney, correct, from Robin Twaddle Associates.
Yes, I actually can't wait, because it's so nice to also hear the stories from him. Do you know what I mean? And I mentioned in the beginning of this episode is the do's and don'ts, what to do, when to do it, how to do it. So I'm really excited for our next episode. I'm sure Robin is as well, because maybe he also wants to get his message across. Exactly how what we're trying to do is to put out a thoughtful, meaningful message to the viewers on how to prepare for the inevitable.
Because quite selfishly, if folk are prepared for death, it makes our jobs easier.
Correct.
And we
It does
can deal with
indeed.
the issues so much better.
And that's on one of our documents as well, is did the deceased leave a written document to his or hers mode of disposal of remains? And lots of people actually say no. I think, why? I mean, I'm 28. I don't know about you, Gavin. Maybe you can just let me know. I'm 28. Yes, I don't have kids, but I've got a living will. I've got a will. Do you have one?
I'm not 28, so to answer that question, but absolutely, and very clear. And it's not only about cremation versus burial, but what do you want to happen with your ashes afterwards? Some folk want to spread the ashes at the Kruger. Not supposed to do it. They want to put the ashes in the sea.
You're not supposed to do it anyway.
Exactly. Some folk have memorials in their homes and things like that. So again, as we keep on saying, just takes pressure off their loved ones. And so we're really looking forward to seeing in the comments how folk have responded to our plea to be prepared for death, as macabre as it sounds. But really, you're leaving a lasting legacy and a gift for your family. And
if anyone has got any questions, please, you can honestly dial us on 011-837-5531, or you can get in touch with Gavin at St. James.
011-616-5377.
Please, so if you're not sure, we can also guide you. We can point you in the right direction, and I'm sure Robin will be gladly happy to assist. But please, this is vitally important. Leave the everlasting legacy for your family and your friends, or if there is no family, your friends, and it's also just rehoming your pets. I think that's a major thing, and I've actually never thought of that, to be honest, Gav. But yeah, so please get in touch. Put a comment underneath the video, or like I said, get in touch with us on our landline number, or drop me an email on gabrielle@tomkight.co.za, or you can reach Gavin on his email address,
Gavin at St. James Church. That's stjameschurch.co.za.
Thank you, and see you next week for the estate planning.
Thank you, Gabby.
Rev'd by day.